The humid summer air hung heavy as Mark and David strolled towards the Serenity Springs Meditation Center. The building, a low-slung structure of weathered wood and glass, looked oddly out of place nestled amongst the sprawling suburban houses. David, ever the optimist, hummed a tuneless melody, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. Mark, on the other hand, dragged his feet, his usual sarcastic grin absent. "You sure about this date?" Mark grumbled, kicking at a loose pebble. "This whole finding inner peace thing sounds like a load of granola-crunching nonsense." David chuckled, unfazed. "Come on, man, it can't hurt. Besides, Brother Thomas is supposed to be amazing. He's really helped me out lately." Mark snorted. "Brother Thomas? Sounds like a character straight out of a bad movie. What? Does he wear a flowing robe and have a mystical beard?" He paused, then added with a smirk, "Does he levitate?" David stopped walking, turning to face Mark with a serious expression. "He's a really good guy, Mark. Seriously. You'll see." They reached the center, the scent of incense and something vaguely earthy filling the air. Inside, the atmosphere was surprisingly calm, a stark contrast to the bustling world outside. Soft music played, and people sat quietly in various postures, their faces serene. Mark felt a prickle of unease, a feeling he couldn't quite place. He wasn't used to this kind of quiet, this stillness. His usual cacophony of internal chatter felt strangely muted. A woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile approached them. "Welcome to Serenity Springs," she said. "Are you here for an introductory session?" David nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, we are. My friend Mark is a little skeptical, but I think he'll enjoy it." He shot Mark a reassuring smile. The woman led them to a small, sparsely furnished room. A man sat cross-legged on a cushion in the center of the room. He was tall and slender, with dark skin that shone with a healthy glow. His head was shaved, revealing a neatly rounded skull. He wore simple, dark robes. This was Brother Thomas. Mark's initial reaction was a mixture of surprise and disappointment. He'd expected something more dramatic. This man looked perfectly ordinary, almost underwhelming. The image of a mystical, levitating monk had been replaced by a man who looked like he could be anyone, anywhere. The letdown fueled his cynicism. Brother Thomas greeted them with a warm smile, his eyes twinkling. "Welcome," he said, his voice calm and resonant. "I understand you are interested in learning more about mindfulness." David eagerly launched into an explanation of their reasons for being there, his enthusiasm infectious. Mark, however, remained silent, his gaze drifting to the details of Brother Thomas's appearance. He focused on the monk's simple robes, the way the light caught the sheen of his dark skin, the way his hands were folded peacefully in his lap. He found himself scrutinizing the details, searching for something to confirm his preconceived notions. Brother Thomas listened patiently, his expression unwavering. When David finished, the monk turned his attention to Mark, his gaze steady and unwavering. Mark felt a strange discomfort under the weight of that gaze. It wasn't judgmental, not exactly, but it was intensely observant, penetrating. It made him acutely aware of his own restless energy, his internal skepticism. "And what are your thoughts, young man?" Brother Thomas asked gently. Mark, caught off guard, stammered, I don't know. It all seems a bit airy-fairy." He tried to inject some sarcasm into his voice, but it sounded flat and unconvincing, even to his own ears. He couldn't help but notice the subtle amusement playing around the corners of Brother Thomas's mouth. It wasn't mocking, but it was there, a quiet acknowledgement of Mark's skepticism. It was then that Mark realized that his carefully constructed wall of cynicism was beginning to crumble. The weight of his own preconceived notions felt heavier than he'd anticipated. He felt a flicker of something else, something akin to curiosity. The seed of doubt had been planted. Brother Thomas smiled, a knowing glint in his eyes. "Airiness and fairy tales are often metaphors for things that are difficult to grasp," he said, his voice calm and measured. "Sometimes the simplest truths are the hardest to see." He paused, then added, "But that doesn't make them any less true." Mark scoffed, crossing his arms. "Easy for you to say. You've got the whole Zen master thing going on. You probably meditate all day and sip chamomile tea." It's easy to be peaceful when you're not dealing with, real life. David, sensing the tension, intervened. Mark, you don't understand. Brother Thomas has helped me a lot. More than you know. Mark raised an eyebrow. Oh, really? What kind of miracle cures did he perform? Did he magically make your acne disappear? He tried to make it sound lighthearted, but the edge of his voice betrayed his underlying skepticism. David ignored the sarcasm. It's not about magic, Mark. It's about finding a way to deal with things, to calm down, to think clearly, to not let everything get to you. He hesitated, then continued, his voice softer now. I was in a bad place before I met Brother Thomas. Really bad. Mark's casual mockery faltered. He knew David had been through a rough patch the previous year, but he'd never delved into the details. He'd assumed it was just teenage angst, the usual ups and downs. He hadn't realized it had been anything serious. What do you mean? Mark asked, his tone less flippant. David took a deep breath. I was self-harming, Mark. I was hurting myself. I was lost, and I didn't know how to get out. His voice was low, almost a whisper. The casual atmosphere of the room seemed to vanish, replaced by a palpable tension. Mark stared at his friend, stunned. He'd never imagined David capable of such self-destructive behavior. The image of his seemingly carefree friend was irrevocably altered. He felt a pang of guilt, a realization of his own insensitivity. He'd been making light of something incredibly serious. I didn't know, Mark stammered, feeling a blush creep up his neck. It's okay, David said softly. I didn't tell anyone for a long time. I was ashamed. He looked at Brother Thomas, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes. Brother Thomas helped me find a way out. He taught me how to manage my anger, my anxiety, how to be present, to focus on the now, instead of letting my thoughts run wild. Mark remained silent, absorbing this unexpected revelation. The image of the serene monk seemed to shift, becoming less of a caricature and more of a figure of genuine compassion and strength. He still felt skeptical, but the skepticism was tinged with a new element, uncertainty. David's words had planted a seed of doubt, a crack in the wall of his cynicism. He taught me meditation, David continued, and mindfulness techniques. It sounds weird, I know, but it really helped. It gave me tools to cope, to deal with the things that were overwhelming me. Mark remained skeptical. The idea of meditation and mindfulness seemed utterly foreign to him, something he associated with hippies and New Age gurus. But David's heartfelt testimony had shaken his initial dismissal. He couldn't simply dismiss it as granola-crunching nonsense anymore. There was something more profound at play here, something he couldn't quite understand, but couldn't entirely ignore either. The seed of doubt had taken root, and it was beginning to grow. The casual dismissal of Brother Thomas and his teachings felt increasingly hollow, replaced by a nagging sense of unease and a flicker of curiosity. He knew he couldn't simply dismiss what David had shared. The weight of his friend's vulnerability and the unexpected role Brother Thomas had played settled upon him, heavy and undeniable. The silence hung heavy in the air after David's confession. Mark felt a wave of awkwardness wash over him. He had never seen his friend so vulnerable, so open about his struggles. He'd always perceived David as the stable one, the reliable one, the one who always seemed to have it together. This revelation shattered that perception, leaving Mark feeling strangely disoriented. Brother Thomas, ever observant, remained silent for a moment, allowing the weight of David's words to settle. Then, with a gentle nod, he said, "It takes courage to share such personal experiences, David. Thank you for trusting us with your story." David nodded, his gaze fixed on the floor. "It wasn't easy," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "There were times when I felt completely lost, like there was no way out. I was angry, frustrated, and overwhelmed. I didn't know how to cope with everything I was feeling." He looked up, meeting Mark's gaze. "I started self-harming when things got really bad. It was a way to release the pressure, I guess. A way to numb the pain." He paused, his voice catching slightly. "It wasn't a solution, of course. It just made things worse." Mark felt a pang of guilt. He'd never really listened to David, never truly understood the struggles beneath his seemingly carefree exterior. He'd been so focused on his own concerns, his own anxieties, that he'd failed to notice the silent suffering of his best friend. And then there was the substance abuse, David continued, his voice barely audible. I started experimenting with drugs, a way to escape, to forget. It was a downward spiral, Mark. I was losing myself. He looked at Brother Thomas again, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. But then I found this place, he said, his voice gaining strength. I came here almost by accident, and I met Brother Thomas. He didn't judge me, he didn't try to fix me. He just listened. Mark could see the sincerity in David's words, the genuine gratitude he felt towards the monk. The image of Brother Thomas, previously dismissed as a caricature, was slowly transforming in Mark's mind. He was starting to see him not as a figure of ridicule, but as someone who had helped his friend navigate a dark and difficult period in his life. He taught me about mindfulness, about being present in the moment, David continued. He showed me how to focus on my breath, how to calm my mind, how to manage my emotions. It wasn't easy at first. It took time, a lot of practice, but it worked. He looked at Mark, his eyes filled with a newfound strength. I'm not saying it's a miracle cure, he said, but it gave me the tools I needed to cope. It gave me the strength to fight back, to reclaim my life. Mark listened intently, his initial skepticism slowly eroding. He was beginning to understand the depth of David's struggles, the magnitude of the transformation he had undergone. He was also beginning to see Brother Thomas in a new light, not as a figure of mockery, but as a source of guidance and support. The casual dismissal he'd felt earlier was replaced by a growing sense of respect, a dawning realization that there was more to this than he had initially perceived. The casual mockery he'd initially felt was replaced by a growing sense of empathy and a flicker of genuine curiosity about the path to healing David had described. The story was no longer just about a strange monk. It was about a friend's struggle and a surprising journey toward recovery. And Mark, against his initial inclination, was beginning to find himself drawn into the narrative. David paused, taking a deep breath. The weight of his confession seemed to lift slightly, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. He looked at Mark, a gentle smile gracing his lips. It wasn't a quick fix, Mark, he said. It took time, a lot of effort, and a lot of setbacks. But Brother Thomas was always there, offering guidance, support, and a non-judgmental ear. He continued, his voice gaining strength. He taught me the importance of self-compassion, of accepting myself, flaws and all. He helped me understand that my past mistakes didn't define me, that I could heal, that I could change. Mark listened, his initial skepticism slowly giving way to a growing sense of awe. He'd always admired David's resilience, but he'd never fully grasped the depth of his struggles or the strength it had taken to overcome them. David's vulnerability, his honesty, had stripped away the superficial layers of their friendship, revealing a profound intimacy he hadn't anticipated. I used to think meditation was just some hippy-dippy nonsense, David admitted, a hint of self-deprecation in his voice. But Brother Thomas showed me that it's a powerful tool for self-awareness, for managing emotions, for finding inner peace. He described the meditation techniques Brother Thomas had taught him, the importance of focusing on the breath, of observing thoughts and feelings without judgment, of finding stillness amidst the chaos of daily life. He spoke of the gradual shift in his perspective, the growing sense of control over his emotions, the ability to navigate difficult situations without resorting to self-harm or substance abuse. Mark listened intently, his mind racing. He was beginning to understand the profound impact Brother Thomas had had on David's life, the transformative power of mindfulness and meditation. The image of the monk, previously dismissed as a caricature, was undergoing a complete metamorphosis in Mark's mind. He was no longer just a figure of ridicule. He was a beacon of hope, a source of strength and guidance. It's not about escaping reality, Mark, David explained. It's about learning to navigate it, to face your challenges with clarity and compassion. It's about accepting yourself, flaws and all, and finding peace within. David's words resonated deeply with Mark. He had always struggled with his own anxieties and insecurities, often resorting to sarcasm and cynicism as a defense mechanism. He'd never considered the possibility of finding inner peace, of managing his emotions in a healthier way. David's testimony was a revelation, a glimpse into a different way of being, a path he hadn't even considered before. The weight of David's confession, the intensity of his transformation, had a profound impact on Mark. It wasn't just about his friend's recovery. It was about the possibility of his own transformation. It was a turning point, a moment of profound realization that challenged his preconceived notions, his cynicism, his skepticism. He was beginning to see the world and himself in a new light. The seed of doubt planted earlier had sprouted, taking root in the fertile ground of his newfound empathy and curiosity. He was no longer simply observing David's story. He was beginning to see it as a reflection of his own potential for growth and change. The casual dismissal he'd initially felt towards Brother Thomas and his teachings felt increasingly inadequate, replaced by a growing sense of respect and a nascent curiosity about the path he might choose to follow. The silence that followed David's story was heavy, pregnant with unspoken emotions. Mark sat there, his mind reeling from the weight of his friend's confession and the unexpected impact it had on him. He felt a strange mixture of emotions, guilt, shame, and a burgeoning sense of curiosity. He'd been so quick to judge, so dismissive of Brother Thomas and his teachings, so blind to the struggles of his closest friend. He looked at David, his gaze filled with a newfound respect. He saw not just a friend, but a survivor, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. He also saw a reflection of his own potential for growth, a path he hadn't previously considered. The journey of self-discovery David had described wasn't just about meditation and mindfulness. It was about confronting one's inner demons, accepting one's flaws, and finding peace within. It was a journey Mark had never embarked on, a path he hadn't even known existed. As he grappled with the implications of David's story, Mark found himself confronting his own prejudices. His initial mockery of Brother Thomas, his dismissive attitude towards meditation, had stemmed from a place of ignorance and fear. He judged the monk based on superficial appearances, on preconceived notions about spirituality and religion. He'd allowed his own biases to cloud his judgment, to prevent him from seeing the truth. Now, confronted with the stark reality of David's transformation, Mark's prejudices felt shallow and insignificant. He realized that his cynicism was a defense mechanism, a way of protecting himself from vulnerability and uncertainty. But David's story had cracked that defense, exposing the insecurity and fear that lay beneath. He began to question his own assumptions about spirituality, about religion, about the very nature of inner peace. He'd always considered himself a rational, pragmatic person, someone who valued logic and reason above all else. But David's experience challenged that worldview, suggesting that there were aspects of human experience that couldn't be fully explained by logic alone. The weight of his own prejudice pressed down on him. He felt a profound sense of guilt for his initial mockery of Brother Thomas, for his dismissive attitude towards the monk's teachings. He'd been insensitive, judgmental, and utterly blind to the transformative power of compassion and understanding. He also felt a deep sense of admiration for David's courage, his honesty, and his willingness to share his vulnerabilities. It was a testament to the strength of his character, to his capacity for self-reflection and growth. And it was a stark contrast to Mark's own defensive cynicism. As he sat there, wrestling with these conflicting emotions, Mark experienced a profound shift in his perspective. He realized that his journey of self-discovery had only just begun. He had a lot to learn, a lot to unlearn, and a lot to confront. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope, a sense of possibility, a willingness to explore the uncharted territory of his own inner world. He was no longer simply observing David's journey. He was beginning to see it as a map for his own. The turmoil within him was intense, but it was also a catalyst for change, a prelude to a journey of self-discovery he hadn't anticipated. The weight of his prejudice, the guilt of his initial judgment, and the newfound respect for both David and Brother Thomas pressed heavily on Mark. He couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to make amends, to apologize for his earlier behavior. The casual dismissal he'd shown towards Brother Thomas felt increasingly inappropriate, even offensive, in light of David's heartfelt testimony. He spent the rest of the day wrestling with his conscience, replaying his initial encounter with Brother Thomas in his mind. His earlier comments, once seemingly harmless, now felt cruel and insensitive. He judged a man based on superficial appearances, on preconceived notions, without ever bothering to understand the depth of his character or the impact of his teachings. The more he thought about it, the more remorseful he felt. He'd been so quick to judge, so dismissive of something he didn't understand. His cynicism, once a shield against vulnerability, now felt like a shackle, preventing him from connecting with others, from experiencing the world with genuine openness. As the day wore on, his initial reluctance to apologize gradually gave way to a growing sense of urgency. He knew he couldn't simply let it go. He needed to confront his own behavior, to acknowledge his mistake, and to seek forgiveness. The thought of facing Brother Thomas filled him with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. He wasn't sure how the monk would react, but he felt compelled to try. He decided to return to the meditation center the following day. He wouldn't seek out a formal meeting. He would simply wait for an opportunity to speak with Brother Thomas privately. He spent the evening preparing what he would say, rehearsing his words in his mind, trying to find the right balance between sincerity and humility. He knew he couldn't simply offer a generic apology. He needed to express genuine remorse, to acknowledge the depth of his prejudice, and to demonstrate a willingness to learn and grow. He wanted to convey his understanding of the transformative power of Brother Thomas's teachings, as evidenced by David's remarkable recovery. The next morning, he returned to Serenity Springs, his heart pounding in his chest. The familiar scent of incense and earth filled the air, calming his nerves slightly. He found a quiet corner, waiting for an opportunity to speak with Brother Thomas. He observed the other visitors, their faces serene and peaceful, a stark contrast to the turmoil within him. He watched Brother Thomas interacting with others, his manner calm and compassionate. He saw the genuine warmth in his eyes, the quiet strength in his demeanor. It was a far cry from the caricature he had created in his mind. Finally, he found a moment when Brother Thomas was alone. He approached him cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the encounter. He knew this was a crucial step, not just in making amends for his past behavior, but in embarking on a journey of self-discovery and growth. The apology wasn't just about seeking forgiveness. It was about seeking understanding, about opening himself up to a new way of being. He was ready to face the consequences of his actions and to embrace the possibility of a transformative encounter. Mark approached Brother Thomas, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. He'd rehearsed his apology countless times, but the words seemed to catch in his throat as he stood before the monk. Brother Thomas looked up, his gaze calm and steady, devoid of any judgment. There was a quiet strength in his presence that both unnerved and comforted Mark. "Brother Thomas," Mark began, his voice barely a whisper, I wanted to apologize for my behavior the other day. I was disrespectful, insensitive, and frankly, incredibly stupid." He paused, taking a deep breath to steady his nerves. The words tumbled out, a torrent of remorse and self-recrimination. He confessed his initial prejudice, his dismissive attitude, his judgment based on superficial appearances. He spoke of his shame, his guilt, and his newfound understanding of the transformative power of the monk's teachings, as evidenced by David's remarkable journey. He spoke of his own struggles with anxiety and cynicism, his reliance on sarcasm as a defense mechanism. He confessed his ignorance, his fear of vulnerability, and his willingness to learn and grow. He spoke of the profound impact David's story had had on him, the way it had shattered his preconceived notions and opened his eyes to a new perspective. He spoke with a sincerity that surprised even himself. He wasn't just reciting a rehearsed apology. He was pouring out his heart, confessing his flaws, and seeking understanding. He spoke of his newfound respect for Brother Thomas, for his patience, his compassion, and his unwavering commitment to helping others. Brother Thomas listened patiently, his expression unwavering. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes, didn't rush the process. He simply listened, his gaze steady and unwavering. When Mark had finished speaking, a long silence hung in the air, broken only by the soft sounds of the meditation center. Then, Brother Thomas smiled, a gentle, knowing smile that radiated warmth and understanding. "Your apology is accepted, young man," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "It takes courage to confront one's prejudices, to acknowledge one's mistakes, and to seek forgiveness. You have shown great courage today." Mark was taken aback by the monk's grace and understanding. He'd expected anger, perhaps even disdain. Instead, he received acceptance, compassion, and a quiet affirmation of his journey towards self-discovery. "We all make mistakes," Brother Thomas continued. "The important thing is to learn from them, to grow from them, and to strive to be better. Your willingness to apologize, to confront your biases, is a testament to your capacity for growth." He paused, then added, "The path to enlightenment is not always easy. It requires self-reflection, self-compassion, and a willingness to learn. You have taken the first step on that path today." Mark felt a wave of relief wash over him. The weight of his guilt lifted, replaced by a sense of hope and possibility. He had expected judgment, but he had received understanding. He had sought forgiveness, and he had received acceptance. The encounter had been far more transformative than he could have imagined. It wasn't just an apology. It was a turning point, a moment of profound connection, a step towards a new beginning. The unexpected kindness of Brother Thomas had not only absolved him of his guilt, but had also ignited a spark of hope within him, a belief in his capacity for growth and change. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to continue on the path of self-discovery. Following his heartfelt apology and Brother Thomas's unexpected kindness, Mark felt a newfound openness, a willingness to learn and grow. He was eager to understand the practices that had so profoundly impacted David's life. Brother Thomas, sensing his eagerness, offered to guide him through some basic meditation techniques. They found a quiet corner of the meditation center, away from the gentle hum of the main hall. Brother Thomas instructed Mark to sit comfortably on a cushion, his spine straight but not rigid, his hands resting gently on his knees. He explained that the aim wasn't to achieve a state of complete stillness, but to cultivate awareness, to observe the flow of thoughts and emotions without judgment. "The mind is like a restless monkey," Brother Thomas said, his voice calm and reassuring, constantly jumping from one thought to another. The practice of meditation is to gently tame that monkey, to bring it back to the present moment. He instructed Mark to focus on his breath, to pay attention to the sensation of the air entering and leaving his nostrils, the rise and fall of his chest. He emphasized the importance of non-judgmental observation, of simply acknowledging thoughts and feelings without getting carried away by them. "When your mind wanders," Brother Thomas explained, "and it will simply acknowledge it without judgment. Don't fight it, don't criticize it. Just gently guide your attention back to your breath." Mark found it surprisingly difficult. His mind raced, a whirlwind of thoughts and anxieties. He struggled to focus on his breath, his attention constantly drifting to other things, his day, his worries, his past mistakes. He felt frustrated, impatient, and a little foolish. Brother Thomas smiled gently, sensing his struggle. "It's okay," he said. "It takes time and practice. Don't get discouraged. Just keep bringing your attention back to your breath, again and again." He guided Mark through several meditation sessions, each one a gentle exercise in self-awareness. He taught him different techniques for focusing his attention, for calming his mind, for cultivating a sense of inner peace. He emphasized the importance of patience, persistence, and self-compassion. Beyond formal meditation, Brother Thomas introduced Mark to mindfulness practices, encouraging him to pay attention to his senses throughout the day. He suggested that Mark notice the feeling of his feet on the ground, the taste of his food, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. He encouraged him to approach daily activities with a sense of presence and awareness, rather than rushing through them on autopilot. Mark found that these practices, while initially challenging, gradually began to have a calming effect on his mind. He started to notice the subtle shifts in his emotions, the ebb and flow of his thoughts. He learned to observe his anxieties without getting carried away by them, to acknowledge his feelings without judgment. He began to appreciate the simple things in life, the beauty of nature, the warmth of human connection. He found himself becoming more present, more aware, more mindful of his surroundings and his inner world. The lessons in mindfulness were not just about meditation. They were about cultivating a new way of being, a more conscious, more compassionate way of engaging with the world. It was a gradual process, a journey of self-discovery that was only just beginning. But Mark was committed to the path, eager to explore the possibilities that lay ahead. Despite Brother Thomas's patient guidance and the profound impact he'd witnessed in David, Mark found the meditation practices surprisingly challenging. His initial enthusiasm waned as he struggled to quiet the relentless chatter of his mind. The stillness, once a source of unease, now felt like a frustrating battle against his own restless thoughts. He tried to follow Brother Thomas's instructions, focusing on his breath, observing his thoughts and feelings without judgment. But his mind, a restless monkey as Brother Thomas had described, constantly jumped from one thought to another. Worries about school, anxieties about the future, regrets about past mistakes, all swirled in a chaotic vortex, making it nearly impossible to maintain focus. The initial sessions were excruciating. He felt impatient, frustrated, and even a little foolish. He'd expected some sort of immediate enlightenment, some sudden shift in consciousness. Instead, he found himself grappling with his own restlessness, his inability to still his mind, his resistance to the very process he was attempting. He often found his mind wandering, drifting off into daydreams or anxieties. He'd catch himself thinking about other things, judging himself for his lack of focus, and then feeling even more frustrated. The process, far from being peaceful, felt like a constant struggle, a relentless battle against his own internal chaos. He tried different techniques, focusing on his breath, counting his breaths, visualizing calming images, but none seemed to work consistently. He found himself constantly losing focus, his mind flitting from one thought to another like a butterfly flitting from flower to flower. The stillness, the quiet contemplation, felt unnatural, even alien. He began to question the value of the practices. He'd witnessed the transformative power of mindfulness in David, but he couldn't seem to replicate that experience himself. He felt a growing sense of frustration and discouragement. He started to doubt his ability to master these techniques, to find the inner peace that Brother Thomas had promised. His initial reluctance to embrace these practices resurfaced, amplified by his struggles. The initial skepticism he'd felt towards Brother Thomas and his teachings reemerged, fueled by his frustration and lack of progress. He began to think that perhaps meditation and mindfulness weren't for him, that he was simply too restless, too chaotic, too resistant to the process. He started to miss sessions, making excuses to avoid the practice. He found himself gravitating towards more familiar activities, video games, social media, anything to distract himself from the stillness, the quiet contemplation that seemed to expose the turmoil within him. He felt a growing resistance, not just to the practices themselves, but to the very idea of self-reflection, of confronting his own inner demons. The initial enthusiasm had faded, replaced by a sense of discouragement and a reluctance to continue. The path to inner peace, it seemed, was proving far more challenging than he'd anticipated. Despite his growing resistance and reluctance, Mark continued to attend meditation sessions, albeit with decreasing enthusiasm. He felt a sense of obligation, a commitment to himself and to Brother Thomas, but the practice remained a struggle. His mind remained a restless monkey, constantly leaping from one thought to another, making it nearly impossible to find any sense of stillness or peace. One evening, however, something shifted. He sat on his cushion, his usual frustration simmering beneath the surface. He began the session as he always did, focusing on his breath, trying to quiet the incessant chatter of his mind. But this time, something was different. He found himself less resistant, less judgmental. He noticed his thoughts without getting carried away by them, acknowledging them without criticizing himself for their presence. He simply observed, watched, and let them pass. He focused on the sensation of his breath, the gentle rise and fall of his chest, the cool air entering his nostrils, the warm air leaving. He paid attention to the subtle nuances of his body, the feeling of his feet on the ground, the weight of his body on the cushion. As he continued to focus, a strange sense of calm began to wash over him. The relentless chatter of his mind gradually subsided, replaced by a quiet stillness. It wasn't a complete absence of thought, but a softening of the mental noise, a space between thoughts, a sense of spaciousness within. He felt a sense of presence, a connection to the present moment, a detachment from the anxieties and worries that usually consumed him. He was simply aware, simply observing, simply being. It was a profound experience, a glimpse into a state of being he hadn't known was possible. The feeling was subtle, almost elusive, but undeniably real. It was a moment of profound peace, a quiet stillness amidst the usual storm of his mind. It wasn't a dramatic epiphany, but a gentle unfolding, a quiet revelation of inner calm. He experienced a sense of connection, not just to himself, but to something larger than himself. It was a feeling of belonging, of being part of something greater, a sense of interconnectedness with the world around him. It was a profound and deeply moving experience. The moment didn't last long, but it was enough to spark a renewed interest in the practice. He realized that the journey to inner peace wasn't a sprint, but a marathon, a gradual process of self-discovery and growth. He understood that there would be moments of frustration, moments of resistance, moments when his mind would rebel against the stillness. But he also knew that there would be moments of peace, moments of clarity, moments of profound connection. And that was enough to keep him going, to keep him committed to the path. The glimpse of peace he experienced was a powerful reminder of the potential within him, a beacon of hope guiding him forward on his journey. Following that initial glimpse of inner peace, Mark's approach to meditation and mindfulness shifted. His resistance lessened, replaced by a growing curiosity and a renewed commitment to the practice. He continued attending sessions, but his focus changed. He was no longer striving for some elusive state of perfect stillness, but rather focusing on the process itself, on the journey of self-discovery. He approached the practice with more patience, more self-compassion. He acknowledged his struggles without judgment, recognizing that his mind would wander, that his thoughts would drift. He learned to observe these distractions without getting carried away by them, gently guiding his attention back to his breath, back to the present moment. He started incorporating mindfulness into his daily life, paying attention to his senses, to the details of his surroundings. He noticed the warmth of the sun on his skin, the sound of birds singing, the taste of his food. He approached his daily activities with a greater sense of presence, of awareness. He found that this increased awareness extended beyond the realm of sensory experience. He became more attuned to his emotions, recognizing patterns in his thoughts and feelings. He learned to observe his anxieties without getting overwhelmed by them, to acknowledge his anger without acting on it. He developed a greater capacity for self-regulation, a greater sense of control over his emotional responses. As he continued to practice, he developed a deeper understanding of Brother Thomas's teachings. He began to grasp the wisdom behind the seemingly simple practices, the profound implications of mindfulness and meditation. He understood that the goal wasn't simply to quiet the mind, but to cultivate a greater awareness of oneself, of one's thoughts, feelings, and actions. He began to see the interconnectedness of things, the way his thoughts, feelings, and actions impacted not only himself, but also those around him. He developed a greater sense of empathy, a deeper understanding of the human condition. He began to see the world with more compassion, with more kindness. He also began to understand the importance of self-compassion, of accepting himself, flaws, and all. He realized that his past mistakes didn't define him, that he could learn from them, that he could grow from them. He developed a greater sense of self-acceptance, a greater sense of self-worth. His relationship with David deepened as well. They talked more openly about their struggles, their anxieties, their hopes, and dreams. Mark found himself offering David the same kind of support and understanding that Brother Thomas had offered him. He realized that the lessons he was learning weren't just for himself. They were meant to be shared. The transformation wasn't sudden or dramatic, but gradual and profound. It was a journey of self-discovery, a process of growth and understanding. It was a testament to the power of mindfulness, the wisdom of Brother Thomas's teachings, and Mark's own unwavering commitment to self-improvement. The path had been challenging, but the rewards were immeasurable. He had not only found a greater sense of peace within himself, but also a deeper understanding of himself, of others, and of the world around him. Months passed. Mark continued his practice of mindfulness and meditation, integrating it seamlessly into his daily life. The initial struggles, the resistance, the reluctance had faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance and a growing sense of peace. He no longer saw meditation as a chore, but as a source of strength, a refuge from the chaos of daily life. The changes in his life were profound. His cynicism had softened, replaced by a greater capacity for empathy and understanding. His sarcasm, once a shield against vulnerability, now felt unnecessary, even inappropriate. He found himself connecting with others on a deeper level, engaging with the world with more openness and compassion. His relationship with David deepened, strengthened by their shared experiences and their mutual commitment to personal growth. They talked openly about their struggles, their anxieties, their hopes and dreams, sharing a bond forged in vulnerability and mutual support. His prejudice towards Brother Thomas had completely vanished, replaced by a profound respect and admiration. He no longer saw the monk as a caricature, but as a wise and compassionate guide, a beacon of hope and understanding. He recognized the depth of Brother Thomas's wisdom, the transformative power of his teachings. He understood that Brother Thomas's approach wasn't about imposing beliefs or forcing conformity, but about empowering individuals to find their own path to inner peace. He had offered guidance, support, and a non-judgmental space for self-discovery. He had shown Mark the importance of self-compassion, of accepting oneself, flaws and all. Mark's transformation wasn't just about shedding his prejudice. It was about embracing a new way of being, a more mindful, more compassionate way of engaging with the world. He had learned to observe his thoughts and feelings without judgment, to accept his imperfections, and to approach life's challenges with greater resilience and understanding. He no longer saw the world in terms of black and white, right and wrong. He recognized the complexity of human experience, the nuances of human emotion. He had developed a greater capacity for empathy, a deeper understanding of the human condition. He felt a sense of gratitude towards Brother Thomas, not just for his guidance, but for the opportunity to embark on a journey of self-discovery. He realized that the path to inner peace wasn't about achieving some perfect state of stillness, but about embracing the process, about accepting the ebb and flow of life, about finding peace amidst the chaos. He had learned to appreciate the simple things in life, the beauty of nature, the warmth of human connection. He had found a greater sense of purpose, a deeper understanding of himself, and a profound appreciation for the transformative power of mindfulness. His journey had been challenging, but the rewards were immeasurable. He had emerged from the experience not only transformed, but also deeply grateful for the unexpected lessons he had learned. He had embraced the positive changes in his life, shedding his prejudice and finding a newfound respect for Brother Thomas and the path of mindfulness. The journey had been challenging, but the transformation was complete.